Hello, and welcome to episode 192 of Pop Culturally Deprived, where each week we watch a movie I've never seen before, which is most of them, and talk about the good, the bad, and the users. This week we're going to be talking about Tron Legacy on your Biodigital Jazz podcast. I kind of want to listen to real Biodigital Jazz.
After watching this film, I just want to append everything with man.
Right?
Hey, man, let's go watch that movie, man.
Right? Like, I was thinking this is like the Big Lebowski in Tron. Like, it's the same character.
They're not even subtle, are they?
Yeah, I don't remember him being like that in the first one. Did I miss it, or...?
Yeah, not quite, but I think this is obviously he's been trapped here for ages, and this is the character he devolves to, and, it is arguably one of his most famous characters, or his two most famous characters, basically, Lebowski and Flynn.
Yeah, fair enough.
So...
All right, man.
Hey, man. Yeah. It feels like that was his character tick in the first ones. They do it a lot here to show us that, hey, it's the same character, man. Because he says man a lot, man.
Yeah. All right, before we get into this conversation proper, I believe we have an announcement that we've previously made, but we're continuing to make it.
Yes, we wanted to make sure everyone knew what is coming up. So there is an episode on the feed if you've missed it. So fairly short, us talking about what's coming, but we are running Pop Culture Deprived into the ground. We are finishing it, and we're going to take it out back with a shotgun.
No. We're retiring Pop Culturally Deprived.
Going on long-term hiatus.
Yes, that's better. But we are not stopping watching movies and talking about them together, so please don't be afraid that you won't have us in your earballs anymore. But there will be more information about that coming later.
Earballs?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, earballs.
Okay, good. So we are working towards our episode 200. So we've got a lot of good movies on the list still coming up in coming weeks. So we're looking forward to them. Episode 200, we want to hear from you. We did this for episode 100 and it was great fun. And we want it even more so for episode 200. We want to know what movies you liked us talking about, what were interesting to hear us talk about, what you watched because of the way we talked about it, what changed your thoughts on it, what you didn't like what we said. Come and argue with me. Bring it on. I want to know where, I am repeatedly, as we all know, told that I'm wrong about these things. Come and tell me. Come and try and convince me that the Twilight series is a work of great genius fiction. I'm getting a look.
This is also your opportunity to tell Matthew that The Rock was really not a terrible movie and Jingle Jangle was a wonderful Christmas movie. And now I'm getting a look.
You see, I've been thinking about the Christmas conversation because it's Christmas here in podcast recording land. And the other thing that we didn't get into is, of course, that if you can take the movie and set it at any other time of year and it doesn't change the movie, it's not a Christmas movie. And Jingle Jangle has nothing about Christmas to it.
Okay, but we also had this conversation before about how we can do that with the Christmas Carol.
Yes.
So therefore, the Christmas Carol is not a Christmas movie.
Can you? Oh, I don't think you can do it with the Christmas Carol, because part of the point is him not wanting to give, and it's a season of giving and giving time off to Bob Cratchit.
Okay, but that's not this episode.
Clearly, you can do that with Die Hard. Frankly, here is my hill. I shall die hard on it. So coming up to episode 200, please let us know all your thoughts. Let us know your Christmas movie discussions that you have in your household. Email us, podcast@eloquentgushing.com. Tweet us, Instagram us, Facebook us, DM us, phone us, however you need to. You can look us up anywhere, basically, as Eloquent Gushing.
Yes. Do that thing.
Good. Tron Legacy.
Tron Legacy.
About 40 episodes ago, we covered Tron. Mm-hmm. The first film. So almost a year now. In fact, when this comes out, it will be just under a year. And I assume you've not gone back and listened to the podcast where we talked about it?
I was going to, but who has time for things like that?
Who has time? I had time to bake 2 cakes today, so I listened to a podcast whilst doing so, and it was informative. We talked about how, obviously, that film was beautiful, looked amazing. You could clearly see for the time it was stand out and did some really interesting things, but the plot was a bit mundane. But what would have been good is if they did that in a modern way, but with sort of even more modern sensibilities. 'Cause I think we liked that the computer aspects of it still worked. The idea of computers running a program that gave you an output. It wasn't the way you think about apps and programs now. It was you crunch numbers into a system and eventually it turns around and says, 15.
Right.
Something along those lines. The classic version of what a computer does. It's human intellect to the power of 10.
You missed a prime opportunity to use the number 42 there.
I did. It did not come to me. And then as I was talking, I was like, this is exactly what the computer at the end of the universe does. Anyway, the thing we said in that episode was that it would be really good if there was a sequel that did some of the same sorts of stuff and again was beautiful and interesting and great to look at, but the idea of computers in a modern way and what that means. The difference now where we talk about apps and browsers and the software that we use that is so fundamentally different than it was in 82. And that would be really fascinating with some of the same mindset about the dangers of computers.
Right. We didn't get that in this movie.
Quite a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I really felt like this was the same movie all over again.
Agree.
I mean, really. It's just now we have Clue as the talking head who's in charge of everything. Because he's doing the exact same things. Bringing in rogue programs and making them fight in the Disc Wars. Like, it's exactly the same. The way they spoke about programs was the same. There was no... Like, at one point, they defined Wi-Fi because Kevin Flynn obviously doesn't know what Wi-Fi is. He's been in the program since 1989. But
at the same time, he came up with that idea.
Right, exactly.
Man.
So I was a little bit disappointed in this movie. I enjoyed it in much the same way that I enjoyed Tron because it is an interesting story, but it's less interesting when they're just doing it again. And CGI young Jeff Bridges was not good.
It's one of the first times it was done as a person, and particularly to a person that we knew.
Right. So I was thinking about it because a couple years ago I made you watch the Jim Carrey Christmas Carol, right? Where the whole thing was CGI.
Yes, you did. And every year I forget that. I watched that, didn't I?
You did.
Totally forgot, yeah.
And it's the same kind of CGI that was in that movie and that they used for Jeff Bridges' face. And in A Christmas Carol, I always say, it's so good. It's so good. It looks really good. The difference between the two, I think, is that every character in Christmas Carol was that. And they had that look about them. And so it looked like realistic computer stuff.
Yep.
And my brain can assimilate that and understand how wonderful it is doing that with one character in the middle of this world where you're surrounded by real people. It did not work.
It's still, and this is 10 years ago, it's missing just some of the finer nuances of human expression.
Yes.
As I'm talking to you now, you had a quick look to the side to, I think, check the time, check the recording was okay, something like that. You raised an eyebrow as I said something. You give me a little smile. Now, it does those things. It does the big things of expressions of surprise and expressions of anger and British frowning and American frowning and different sorts of frowning and so on. But the slight twitches of the lip and the looks of the eyes and so on, it's just that really small expression that allows us to go to the uncanny valley. And we'd look at it and we're like, oh, yeah, no, that's not real. As well as in this still, I think there's just a slight bit of the sort of Final Fantasy shininess to the CG that's a little bit like, oh, they're not quite right. And you're exactly right. Because it's in the middle of lots of people, it stands out. And as digital de-aging has gone on, I mean, we have just had it in a major TV show finale that has a moment of digital de-aging that is a bit weird and a bit mixed in how it comes across. And we've had it in major motion pictures, which was a bit mixed in how it came across, again, because of these same issues. When they use it on Clue, I really like it.
Okay.
Because, although, yes, he's the only person doing this, he's not real. And they do this. They do this in Doctor Strange. There is a moment where the Ancient One and Doctor Strange are out of their bodies, and anytime they're out of their bodies, it's this sort of CG version of them. Mm-hmm. And it works because it's an out-of-body experience. They're not supposed to look 100% real. And having it for the artificial version of Jeff Bridges, mm-hmm. I'm fine with. Okay, great. They're sort of helping us distinguish which one is which, although obviously there's an age difference and so on. It helps inform our watching of it. But the moments where we're supposed to be watching him as actual young Kevin Flynn, mm-hmm. Yeah, not quite good enough.
Yeah. It was when they first showed him, mm-hmm. right? Because the first scene that we got with him was when he was talking to young Sam and telling him the story of the grid. And mostly we got his back. But as he was walking out, we got his full face. But he wasn't really talking or doing anything. We were just watching him walk away. And it was like, oh, they made Jeff Bridges younger. Cool.
Yeah.
But then they made him talk a lot in some of the flashbacks. Mm-hmm. And that's when it got a little weird. Now, watching Clue talk a lot, I get what you're saying. Because he is supposed to be artificial. So that does make a little bit more sense. And it was actually, the more Clue talked, the more I was like, this really isn't that great.
Yeah.
Because like his tongue was weird.
There's a stiffness to it. It's not quite, and again, it's the really small little curls of the lip as you talk, and they're not quite at that point yet. And I still don't think they are. When we're talking things like Rogue One, was it Rogue One? Yeah. And some of the Marvel stuff where they've done digital, because it's all Disney. Obviously, this is a Disney film; those are Disney films. It's getting better, and eventually it will get to a really good point.
I wonder if we're being too hard on it though, because this movie is a decade old.
Yeah,
because I feel like it came out that long ago.
No,
it did.
Actually, the 21st, so Monday, was exactly 10 years since I saw this film at the cinema. Because it came up on my previously on Matthew on Facebook. It's like, I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed it had it come out before 2004.
Okay.
Had it been pre the Matrix sequels, this would be one of the great films of its type. Post the Matrix sequels, which also do digital action and things, and I don't think they're not as good, but this doesn't feel like we're 7 years beyond where we were with the Matrix.
Yeah.
Sequels. Yeah. So there's that. And yes, that's a very, very big thing to raise. The rest of how it looks, and this is what it sells me on, this is an astonishingly beautiful film.
It absolutely is. Like, it took the things that we liked about the original Tron and modernized them for the modern eye. Like, the lights were beautiful. The motorcycle racing was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like, the motorcycles themselves were gorgeous. I'm here for that, absolutely. And I think that goes a long way towards increasing my enjoyment of the film. Which is that I enjoyed the experience of watching it.
Yeah.
All of the things that Kevin Flynn was able to, like, manifest in his world that were real, but were not quite real, but still very, I just enjoyed it. It was a little less Star Wars-y, too. Which I think helped a lot. I almost was like, oh, they're doing the X-Wing thing again, but then or TIE Fighter, whichever one it is, but then the wings went all the way down, and I was like, oh no, it's just a plane.
Yeah.
So that was better.
And I think over and above the special effects, you're absolutely right. They take all the stuff that's cool, that's really good about Tron, and they make it, those ships that were all, blocky CG flying around, they feel substantial and heavy, and they, are really good effects. The cinematography and some of the shots of this film are incredibly good. It is, the stuff that we will come to see after this in the MCU. It's really reminiscent of Thor Ragnarok and some of the Guardian stuff. How every so often you get these shots of like panoramas or things happening and people floating in space or driving towards each other. And it's like someone's really thought about this and put together something cool. Bits of them fighting upside down. You get the close-up of them looking at each other and so on. They're worthy of becoming iconic because it's so good, except the film's not strong enough to make them iconic.
Right.
It's a real shame.
Yeah, the script is honestly, it feels a little bit like they just took the original movie and tweaked a few things for the story. I wanted so much more out of it, and I was a little disappointed. Like, even how it starts, like, Sam just accidentally ends up in the grid, right? And that's exactly what happened in the first one. They accidentally ended up inside the program. And it wasn't... Like, I wanted him to figure out what it was and figure out that's where his dad was and intentionally go in and find him. Like, that would have been a much stronger story.
It's really strange how they didn't take the idea of computers and update it. It's almost like from the point of Tron onwards, the world of Tron, and this is something, the grid, as we now call it, and it was something we bemoaned on our Tron episode, the fact they don't name this world. So we now have a name for it, the grid. The grid has evolved from there, but it doesn't match the evolution of humans' computer world. So although in Tron, the analogy and the metaphor was, what if machines were what if computer programs were people or had emotions? This has then gone, and what if that world continued for 30 years? Rather than being, what if you went into the computer world now, what does it look like? Which
that would have been much more interesting, but they would have had to do a lot of exposition to get us to a place where we believed that Kevin Flynn was stuck for 30 years.
Okay, yeah.
In a world that had evolved like that. So, like, to take the easy way out in the story, I understand why they did that. But like you, I wish that we had gotten the modern world, because that's what they did in 1982, right?
Absolutely.
It was like they modernized their idea of what the computer world is, and this was just a rehashing of that.
Yes. And I think this is why I wish this had come out before the Matrix sequels, because the Matrix sequels do and we talked about how Tron begets Hackers and the Lawnmower Man and eventually the Matrix. In some ways, the Matrix sequels do interesting things about computer programs and what their job is to do, and machines and how they exist in the Matrix. And it does some of this work. And this film just comes up with the idea of the ISOs, but doesn't tell us what they are.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, they're super programs. What does that even mean? Like, they could have gone down a route of, and then suddenly we got browsers, and browsers are able to link any other machine system together, and then you suddenly get another browser that's even better, and so on. Do something clever.
But we did get an ISO who was able to manifest into a real person at the end.
Yes.
Which is weird.
Yes. At least there wasn't a kiss.
I was going to say that.
Right? Okay.
Because that was the thing that I hated the most about the first one.
Absolutely,
they put that stupid kiss in there, and they didn't do that here. Yeah. It's fantastic. That was fantastic. I love that they didn't do it.
And it almost stands out here that there should have been a kiss. Like, there is much more chemistry between them, and there is an actual story between them. The problem with the kiss in the first one is she has nothing to do with, the other problems with the character aside, she has nothing to do with Flynn. There's no reason for that kiss other than, tell me about this human thing called kissing. Right. Star Trek BS. In here, at least they had a thing, and they went through a trial together, and you could have, I can see it in a generic Disney way, yeah. But
or at least at the end, before they drove off on the motorcycle, when they're both human in the world.
Yeah.
That would have been a great place for it. So.
But I appreciate they didn't. I thought it was better without it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's cool. All the problems we had with the female character in the first one are pretty much fixed here. She has her own agency. She does stuff. She is important to the plot. There is a reason for her being there. And she's the one who saves him and does good stuff. And including the great moment, her introduction is cool, where she comes in the car and saves him and drives off and does the big jump. And he's like, oh no, you'll never make it. And she lands and she just looks at him and she's like, made it. Amazing. Great.
I'm glad you like that.
Yeah. I mean, I like Olivia Wilde a lot, but...
I forgot she was in this until she showed up on the screen.
Right. She's good.
Yeah.
I enjoy her sort of the childlike naivete of the ISOs that you see in her, with her wanting to know more information and ask about the world and so on. But also
her Jules Verne?
Yeah. That's
What's
so
he like?
funny.
It's great. It's
You know,
great.
it's the sort of joke we do see in a lot of things. I mean, having just watched Elf tonight, it's a joke from Elf.
Oh, yeah.
But it works. It's good. She absolutely sells it for me.
Can we talk about my favorite character?
Your favourite character? Yes. Is it Aziraphale?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Right.
Michael Sheen. Oh, my God, is amazing. I was shocked. I had no idea he was in this either. But, I mean, he's playing that character that Michael Sheen plays now. Like, that's just what he does. But I liked it. I was sad when he turned out to be a bad guy, but, you know, it's what he does.
I have referenced this scene, and I cannot remember what podcast it was on and why I did it. Because I talked to you about how we were going to get a scene in a film where, and I can't remember if I told you it was Michael Sheen or not, but someone did one of the greatest David Bowie impressions ever.
Ah, okay.
And it's this. He is basically Jareth for most of this, and then he goes into full Ziggy Stardust at the end. It's incredible, and it's wonderful. And you know, Michael Sheen is renowned for doing great impressions of real people. And you know, portraying them on screen. And it is basically like someone said, hey, could you be David Bowie and just for a couple of scenes for us and then go away?
Okay. I'm not super familiar with David Bowie in that way, so I didn't get that from it. It was Rockstar Aziraphale.
Yeah, basically.
That's what I got out of it.
Have we talked Flight to the Conchords at some point?
I'm sure we have. You're looking at me like...
Yeah, and I cannot remember why, but cause I think it was in that because Jermaine Clement does a great David Bowie impression in that. And I think it might have been, but we have another film coming up where it's even better. And
okay.
it's one of, yeah, his scenes, they absolutely said, it's a little bit like in Les Mis when Thénardier comes on and does Master of the House. It's that sort of, it's been serious and dark, and we've got suicide and rape and all sorts of bad things going on, crime and the underground and the miserable people. And now we've got fun and jolly singing and trying to rip off French people, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. It's
I just
a great
really
moment.
like Michael Sheen.
And then, you know, there's a giant brawl going on, so he's pretending to play guitar and then firing laser bolts at him, and Catherine turns to me and goes, this is like Destiny 2. And it was basically an emote at that point, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love it. So good. Yep.
Good.
I wish we had gotten a little more story outside of the grid in this one.
Okay.
I love that Sam grew up to kind of be like his dad, like to have his dad's ideals, even though the company went in a different direction because Kevin was gone. And so I love the idea of his annual prank and, you know, taking their OS and putting it out on the web. I wanted to see, because at the end, he very clearly is ready to take over the company. He tells Real World Tron, I can't remember his name, Alan.
Bruce
He tells-
Boxleitner.
Yeah. He tells Alan that he's ready to take over the company, which is great, but I want to see him actually take over the company. And I want to see him properly grieve his father and tell Alan what happened. Right? Like, I want that piece of the story.
The thing that... Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think it is set up for a sequel to do some of this stuff. Because Cillian Murphy is David Warner's son. Why is Cillian Murphy in this film for a
That's
scene?
who that was.
Why have we got the Scarecrow cropping up in the middle of a Tron film for a scene and then not doing anything more? It's so strange.
Yeah, maybe they were hoping to do another sequel. Did this one not do well in the box office?
It wasn't hugely well received, partially because it is just kind of boring.
Yeah.
Really?
Okay.
So I get it. I'm having a quick look. It hits about 50%, and the general reactions were, yeah, looks amazing, it's visually beautiful. That's all I can say about it. And that I completely get that.
Yeah.
I can understand the things. It's hard for me to be totally objective, because 10 years since I saw it with one of my best friends when he was visiting, having moved to Seattle. He came back to the UK for Christmas. It was a pretty rubbish year all round. And this is one of the bright spots I can remember from that year.
Right.
So,
Okay.
you know, going with someone... Oh, I talked on the Tron episode about how I just assume everyone's seen Tron. Mm-hmm. Dom is one of the people who would have just seen Tron from an early age and grown up with that as an idea.
Got it.
So,
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of those people who had not.
No, as it turns out, most people were, but I think... Anyway, we talked about
Yeah.
Yes, a sequel with him taking over the company would have been really cool. Mm-hmm. And especially because that could have had some of that going back and forth between the worlds. Again, a little Matrixy. And with Quora doing stuff. Quora.
Yeah.
With a Q. Doing stuff would have been cool.
Yeah.
Because what we've not really talked about is Sam himself.
Okay.
Because...
There's something specific you want to talk about, Sam?
No, there's nothing specific to it. It feels like there's this period in the 5-10 years in the middle of the 2000s, 2010s, where Hollywood goes through lots of possible leading men and doesn't know who is going to be the next one. Mm-hmm. Where you've got who's this? Garrett Hedlund. Famous Garrett Hedlund. You know, and I can only obviously think of famous ones, but people like Sam Worthington, who got 5-10 films and then disappeared off again.
Yeah.
I feel like there are a lot of films of this ilk that got leading actors who just had nothing about them. And I feel very much that about the lead role in this.
Yeah, I was surprised whenever he showed up and I didn't recognize him. It's like I expected this to be somebody who became somebody or was already one of those teen heartthrobby
Chris Evans.
dudes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but I wasn't even thinking that big. Although Chris Evans was certainly not big whenever this came out.
Well, I think this might be a year before Captain America, to be fair. Yeah. But, someone...
someone along those lines.
Yeah,
not somebody that I had never seen before. But
in my head, it was Shia. But I think that's because this is basically what they did with Shia in the last Indiana Jones film.
Oh.
It's exactly the same role and...
Okay.
Trying to handle it. Because is this our first distant sequel that we've done?
I don't think so.
Okay. I tried to think through and nothing stood out to me. Because it has become a trend, but I don't think we've covered anything yet that stands as 15, 20 years later.
Well, I guess Die Hard 5. Because we talked about at the end, they were trying to make his son. Yeah. We felt like they were trying to pass the reins.
Yeah.
But it wasn't his movie yet.
No, and it wasn't quite this... it's a proper generation later.
Yeah.
Since the last movie that it's come out, something like that. Maybe the Ghostbusters reboot, but even that was a reboot rather than a sequel. Mm-hmm. Anyway, one of my favourite things, you've mentioned Bruce Boxleitner. Let's talk about Tron / Rinsler. Rinsler purrs like a cat whenever he's on screen.
Really?
Every time he comes on screen, there's just this he's evil and going to kill you because he's so amazing. And to show that, because he's wearing a mask, so that we don't know that it's Tron yet, you get this sort of noise in the background that's it is like a cat purr. I'm not going to try and do that because I know I would embarrass myself trying to purr like a cat down the microphone. Or it'd be really weird. Everyone's like, PCD has become ASMR. We're not going down that route.
Yeah.
Hey, how's about that for a new podcast?
No.
No, okay.
It took me, it was at the very end, and I don't know if it's because I'm slow on the uptake or because the movie didn't tell me, but I did not realize that Tron and Rensler were the same. Mm-hmm. Even after Kevin Flynn was like, oh, that's Tron, Tron's alive, I still didn't realize that was Rensler.
Right. It's another aspect that feels like they're building up to a sequel. Some sort of the redemption of Tron, something like that. And I think part of the reason you wouldn't realise is it doesn't matter who Rinsler is. He's just henchman. In the same way, it doesn't matter who Clue's sidekick, apparently here, is called Jarvis.
Yes.
It's a little on the nose. James Frayne, Sarek. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter who he is. It's another character we've got in there. Mm-hmm. And even that's a character that doesn't come off. I think he's supposed to be funny in how weedy and cowardly he is. It's just annoying and tropey.
Yeah, the long live the users, death to users
programs.
thing.
Yeah.
That it was irritating, but Yeah, no, I like that because Tron didn't die. Like, he sunk to the bottom of the grid ocean, but he didn't.
And we saw his colors change.
His colors changed, but he didn't derez like the rest of them do when they die. So I was actually expecting to see him again in the movie.
Right?
But he was just gone.
Yeah. It feels like a film that's had a number of reshoots and had a number of threads they were going to do with Dillinger's son, with Rinsler, with other things going on, that they just ended up going to the core. We've lost a thing and we need to get back to our home base before everyone else does.
Yeah.
The really standard kids film plot. And it's a shame they didn't go for something more clever, more interesting.
But it was still entertaining to watch.
But it is entertaining, as these films always are, and then it's beautiful on top of that. Like, that goes a very long way. And it's got this incredibly thumping soundtrack.
I didn't notice.
The music all the way through is just cool, because all the stuff in the real world is sort of quasi-Avengers fanfare, nostalgia piano, sort of playing on some of the themes and the ideas from the first film. So it's really standard. And then when he gets into the grid, it becomes a lot more electronic. It's got a more sort of EDM aspect to it. And then when he gets to the club, and you actually see Daft Punk playing as DJs, and Daft Punk did the soundtrack for this.
Okay.
And once they start actively fighting, once Flynn engages in the combat and so on, it really does kick into another gear, and it just becomes proper sort of club hits. But
okay,
they're really good. They are all bangers.
I honestly just didn't notice.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I do quite like that you have Daft Punk there in the Tron style helmets that they would wear anyway.
Yeah.
It's cool. Yeah.
A little on the nose, though.
Yeah. Brilliant. Bring it on.
Yeah. I mean, all in all, I would say it's a movie worth watching. It's not a bad movie at all. It's not a great movie. It had so much potential, and I wish it had realized that potential. But I mean, I would watch it again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not one... I think I've only seen it, obviously, this time at the cinema, maybe one time in between.
Okay.
But I'm not, over it so much because I've given it a good amount of space between them. So it's one that you can leave on, absolutely.
Yeah. For sure.
Any other favourite bits? Anything else that stood out to you? Anything that was cool?
This is going to be a really weird thing.
Okay.
I really liked the arcade sign. It said Flynn's.
Yeah.
The way it was like, because it was the corner building, and so it was like a pointed round, and the letters kind of went round around the building with it. I liked it a lot.
Okay.
It's random, I know.
Nice.
I enjoyed it.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about everything else that I liked.
Yeah. I like, the plot is really average and really ordinary and not worth commenting on. But I do like the aspect that it's Flynn's hubris in saying create a perfect system without understanding the abstract nature of what the perfect system might be. Especially when you involve humans and other uncontrollable aspects. And actually it's the imperfection of a system that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. I wish they had spent a little bit more time on that.
Absolutely,
They kind of
threw
threw the moral of the movie at us a little bit at the end and kind of hit us over the head, like in our face. I'm sorry. I know you did what you were supposed to do. I was wrong. We got all of that. But I wish they had leaned in a little bit more to the idea that Clue wasn't a villain.
No.
He was doing what he was programmed to do, and he was doing it to the best of his ability, but he was just the villain of the movie.
Yeah, because if he's just following his programs and doing everything the best he can, you wouldn't have him giving big speeches about taking over the world.
True.
In the sort of, the Empire-esque way that he does. And that's the shame of it. Exactly, you're exactly right. Like, there's a really cool idea in there that he's trying to do something that is both impossible and actually the wrong way to go about it. Flynn means perfect system in a world where everyone is happy and wants to be there and good stuff happens, but that's not perfection.
Right.
In some ways.
Right. Yeah. His idea of perfect and a computer's idea of perfect are going to be completely different.
Yeah.
And I wish that we had gotten a little bit more of that idea driving the film.
And it's especially good because the film seems to set up at the beginning that there's going to be the evil corporation trying to shut them down.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly the plot of the first one with the MCP. Mm-hmm. But at least, it doesn't quite go that far, which again is good.
Yeah. Yeah, the corporation, income didn't serve any purpose other than to show growth in Sam, because in the beginning he doesn't want to lead it, and at the end he does. That's it. Like, other than that, income didn't need to be there at all because it has no bearing on this story.
Yeah, it's... Because I'm about to say that it's interesting at the beginning. It's interesting to people like us. The discussion they get into is the difference between purchasable software and open source software, and what they should be doing and how they should be doing, and how the comparison of the internet to operating systems, and what did we actually change before we charge people for this new thing? Oh, we put a 12 on the box. Right. Well, we know that's not true. That's not how these things work. Certainly not for operating systems. But the debate, certainly at that time, was massive, and it still goes on about open source software or purchasable software.
Right.
But again, it goes nowhere. That's it. We're done.
Okay.
Yeah, the film just goes, yeah, that's an idea that exists. In the same way it mentioned, you're right, they mentioned Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. Hey, Wi-Fi exists. Oh, Wi-Fi, you can share data. Cool. Anyway.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Okay, and what does that mean in the world of Tron? Could we have, like, open source software as this cool, South Korea society, and the, Microsofts of this world, and North Korea? Like, go hard on that metaphor or something,
Oh, yeah, that'd be good.
Like,
but they would have to incorporate modern technology into this world of the grid, and they couldn't do that. I mean,
they just decided
somebody could have, but
yeah,
the people who made this movie couldn't.
Have it like it's a city that, you start off with like small houses and small buildings that are the old programs, and gradually the programs that get bigger and the buildings they live in get bigger and smarter, and it becomes like a massive, skyscraper city or something, and it just becomes more advanced the further in you get compared to these old timers. Like, there are ways of doing it. They just don't go anywhere with it.
Yeah.
I'm back on my soapbox, aren't I?
Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay, though. That's why we have a podcast.
Okay.
All right. Anything else we need to talk about that we didn't talk about yet?
Probably. But, as long as we've talked about Michael Sheen, we're all good.
Yes.
Because he's worth watching the film for, frankly.
He really is. He's great. He's fantastic. Yeah. So I'm glad to see that they brought Bruce Boxleitner back. Because, he doesn't really do much anymore. You didn't even know who he was when we talked about him the first time, other than being the guy from Tron.
You didn't know who he was.
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
and
you
I
didn't.
did. Yeah, I did. He's the guy from Babylon 5.
Oh, that's right. I forgot he did Babylon.
And many other random sci-fi things. You knew him because he was the Scarecrow in something.
The Scarecrow and Mrs. King.
In a show that no one else has watched other than like you and your mum.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So, what is next on PCD?
Next, we're staying in this very sophisticated, high-tech, sci-fi concept thing with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Indeed.
Have you watched Ratchet yet?
No.
Okay. Are you wanting to do One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest so you can watch Ratchet?
Yes.
I thought so.
Yes.
Okay.
I probably don't need to, especially since it's a prequel, but, I wanted to see the origin of this character that's so iconic in history.
Okay.
So
cool.
That's where we are.
So, do you know anything about it on the Ratchet character?
No. I believe it's an asylum, and she's a terrible person and mistreats people in the asylum. That's all I know. And I don't even know if I know that.
Good. Well, we'll find out next week.
We will find out
next week. And you, dear
week.
listener, we'll find out next week.
All right. If you have any comments about Tron Legacy and the CGI and all of the other wonderful things that we talked about in this episode, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Eloquent Gushing, or you can send us an email to podcast@eloquentgushing.com. And don't forget, we would love to hear your thoughts about the show as a whole over the last 4 years. Tell us your favorites. Tell us the things that you argued with us about the most. Tell us what you wish you had heard us talk about that we didn't, so that we can incorporate all of your thoughts into our final episode. You can also find me on Twitter at Mandy K.
And I'm on Twitter. I'm at Matthew Vose. Pop Culture Deprived is 100% funded by our listeners through Patreon. Anything you can give, it gives access to bonus shows and exclusive shows and extra cool stuff that we do that's a lot of fun. But it also helps to support the network, helps us to develop those new shows. Wink, wink, coming soon. If you want to find out more, you can go to patreon.com/eloquentgushing.
And we will be back next week with another episode where we are going to talk about Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Until then, I'm Mandy Kay.
And am I still to create the perfect system? Pop Culturally Deprived is an Eloquent Gushing production. For more information, visit eloquentgushing.com or find us on Twitter at eloquentgushing.